everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over my favorite books that I read in 2025. Just like last year, the same rules apply. Only books that I have read for the first time in 2025, so no rereads. I have tried to kind of keep it to one book per one author. Some of these are series, but only if I really liked them. Again, it doesn't have to be books that were published in 2025, just books that I read for the first time in 2025. Let's get started. First of all, I'm going to do some honorable mentions, and then I will do my top 10 favorite books of the year. And they are in kind of no particular order, both the honorable mentions and the top 10 list, because I read a lot of books, and it's literally like pulling teeth trying to get me to pick 10 favorites. This list was literally being changed and updated even until like the last 5 minutes before I was filming this video, so my opinion is probably going to completely change even by the time I've posted this video. And if I tried to actually number all of these and like say which was my top 100% favorite book of the year and which was my least favorite book of the year, least favorite book of the year, it would just be an absolute nightmare. I would again be in the comments being like, actually I changed my mind every 5 seconds. So that disclaimer aside, let's get into it. I also do like my grilled cheese earrings. I'm going to show them off in every video because I love them. So first honorable mention I want to talk about is The Steerswoman and The Outsider Secret by Rosemary Kirstein. These were books that I read earlier this year. My library had the first two in an omnibus for some reason, and then none of the others. They had the first two in an omnibus and then none of the rest, so I'm gonna continue the series, but just not until I can buy those books from her website or something, because I don't know where to get them. But these are really charming science fantasy books about fantasy librarians. The Steerswomen, who are this organization of all women. There are male steerswomen, but it's mostly women, and they basically go around and collect knowledge, and they also share their knowledge with other people. And there's like this fun rule, which is like, if you don't answer a question from a steerswoman, they like shun you and don't share their knowledge with you. The whole organization no longer talks to you. So this does one of my favorite things, which is like, again, true science fantasy, where you start the book off thinking it's like a fantastical secondary world, and then the longer the book goes on, the more you realize it's actually kind of sci-fi. But it's a very low-key sci-fi where it's just like people living in a kind of post-apocalyptic or so far future world that it has completely reset and gone back to like vaguely medieval times, and there's just these remnants of technology that are viewed as magic, and I love that. And it's very present in this series, and I love the dynamic between the two leads. I don't remember their names, but I remember really liking them, and I remember that they have this very like Xena and Gabrielle dynamic, where it's like a big buff barbarian lady and like a small smart lady, and they don't kiss, but I can push them together like dolls in my head. So yeah, I recommend that one. I feel like it's not as well known, so that's why I wanted to highlight it in this honorable mentions list. I had a great time reading them, and I can't wait to continue the series. And then I also have Dark Air by C.S. Pacat, which I kind of mostly wanted to put on this list as an honorable mention so that C.S. Pacat could be the only author with the honor of being on both my best and worst lists. Because you'll definitely hear it in the video where I talk about my least favorite books of the year, but I hated the Captive Prince series, like hated with a burning passion. That rant is gonna be 40 minutes long probably. So for a long time I stayed away from this series, and then I saw someone whose opinion I really respect talk about it very highly, and they have not read the Captive Prince series, so I don't think that they were going into it with the baggage that I was going into it with. I went into this book prepared to be a hater because I hated Captive Prince. Surprise, surprise, I actually really enjoyed this book. It is dealing with some really interesting questions about fate and predestination. That is not a word, but it should be. Dealing with fate and predetermination and the idea of inherent goodness, and whether we're all just doomed to repeat cycles, and how treating someone like they are destined to be evil kind of pushes them in that direction anyways. And then I also think that the series clearly has a lot of Lord of the Rings influences, which I think is interesting, but it also has a very heavy, in my opinion, Dragon Age Origins inspiration. Like the stewards in the first book are basically just the Grey Wardens. Like there are so many details that are one-to-one, even the idea that they drink from this big cup to become a full member of their secret guardian society, but that drinking from the cup also like starts to kill them. Like it's just, there's such a clear inspiration there, in my opinion. Maybe C.S. Pacat has never played Dragon Age Origins in their life, but I see it. I see the Grey Wardens. And I did read the sequel, Dark Rise. I liked it more in some ways and less in others. It's very much the second book in a series, but I mean, again, I hated Captive Prince so much, and I actually really liked and enjoyed this one, so I wanted it to be on my honorable mentions list. Also on my honorable mentions is Foreigner by CJ Cherryh. I read this book earlier this year and just absolutely loved it. It's so charming to me. I love non-typical like first contact narratives, and this one I think is unique in the fact that it's the humans who go to the alien planet and like crash land on the alien planet, and so they are kind of the aliens there, and I just love this alien society that CJ Cherryh has set up here, and I love kind of the central role of the main human in that society, who is kind of the ambassador translator for the small group of humans who live on this alien planet, and how a lot of this book is about communication and trust, and about how to trust people when your social norms and your way of communication is so different that you don't really understand or can get along with them. I find that really interesting. Like, a lot of this book is Bren trying to trust the aliens but thinking they've betrayed him and wondering if he's about to die. And he also complains about his mail a lot, and I find that very charming. So I really enjoyed this book. I have read like 4 out of 22 books in this series, and I'll continue to read them. They're just very fun space adventure books about Bren, the tiny human, and the Atevi, who have basically adopted him as their mascot. So very fun. Okay, also on my honorable mentions list is Will Do Magic for Small Change and Archangels of Funk by Andrea Hairston, aka the Cinnamon Jones series. I read these books for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction 2025 shortlist, and I think this is just such an underrated, really fun series, and I think Andrea Hairston is such an underrated, really talented author. I have now read all of her novels, I think, and I have enjoyed all of them. They've all been so great, and I think that in particular I really loved the Cinnamon Jones series and thought that it was really impressive how different they were. Will Do Magic for Small Change is like a coming of age story, a magical realism story with a little bit of fantasy elements, but mostly is very grounded in historical fiction and present day urban fantasy, whereas Archangels of Funk is a very like sci-fi, like cyberpunk dystopia kind of book, and I loved them both equally, and I thought that they both had a lot of really interesting heart and charm to them. Andrea Hairston is just so underrated, and I really recommend picking up her books. Another honorable mention I want to talk about is Queen Demon by Martha Wells. I feel like I'm one of the only people on the planet who loved Witch King. I vastly prefer Martha Wells's fantasy to her Murderbot series. Like, I like Murderbot now, I've come around to it, but I really love her fantasy, and I loved Witch King when it came out, and I thought that the kind of only thing I didn't like about Witch King was that it was so clearly meant to be a 10-book long series, but Tora marketing it as a standalone. It was not a standalone, even just within the context of that first book. Like, there's so much left to explore, and I was like, why is this a standalone? But I think that was Tor trying to see if Martha Wells's non-Murderbot would sell, and I think sell it did, because they very quickly stopped promoting it as a standalone and started promoting it as the first book in the, I think it's called the Rising World series, yes. And they did not say anything about this being, you know, okay, it does say series, it doesn't say duology, it doesn't say trilogy, it says series. So I'm glad that they've stopped pretending these are standalones or that this is going to be a short series, because what I love about this series is that it is so slow but not boring. Like, we're just really, really slowly maneuvering all these pieces together. It's very character focused and very much about political intrigue, especially anti-imperialism. I love this book's focus on this series, but this book in particular is focused on rejecting kind of the easy like idea of philanthropy and like one powerful rich central figure bestowing gifts upon the masses of charity in favor of kind of messy coalition building with lots of different groups who all have their own needs, engaging in mutual aid and like helping each other be self-independent and like find what they actually need to survive. I love that. It was such a breath of fresh air after some other kind of disappointing books in regards to empire and colonialism that I have read this year in the fantasy space, which again we'll talk about in my worst books of the year list. So I just really loved the experience of reading this. It almost made it onto the actual favorites list, but just slightly missed it, just because I feel like there were other books I felt more strongly about, but I still did really love this book, and I think again I was waiting for it for such a long time, and then I got an early arc of it, so I read it like a couple months ago in the summer, and I just really loved it. It's just a book that, again, I could read like 10 books in this series, and my one complaint is that I want them to be longer, and I want the series to be longer, and like I got done with this book and I was immediately like, I want more. I just want more of this world and these characters and their extremely slowly moving relationship dynamics. So Loved Queen Teeman. Again, can't wait for the next one. So the last book on my honorable mentions list is The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman, and this was one of the first books that I read this year back in January. And I still, low-key, I want to reread it because I really liked this book. I am a big fan of Lev Grossman's Magicians trilogy, and something that I just love about his work is just his prose. I just love the experience of reading this book. I felt like the prose was so good. It has one of the best final lines of any book I've ever read, and that's a high bar to clear. Like, I just loved that final line. I felt like it slammed the book to a close for me. And overall, have never been like a huge Arthurian legend person. I have a working knowledge of Arthurian legend, and then of course, so I watched BBC Merlin as a teenager, so I have that knowledge, but it's never been like a great passion of mine, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the legends, but I found this to be a really engaging story anyways. I loved the tack it took where it's like all of the outcast knights who like weren't good or powerful enough to be with Arthur when he died, and a huge theme of the story is nostalgia and like looking back with fondness on this world that you almost got to be a part of but missed, and now things seem so terrible, but also fighting against nostalgia and saying like maybe that world never existed and maybe it wasn't as good as it seemed back then, like the grass is always greener on the other side. And I felt like this really neatly broke up kind of the monotony of quest fantasy of like going to one place and finding the thing you need but being told that you now need to go to a second place, with the kind of backstory chapters of the knights and the various, again, facets of their identity that Grossman was exploring. I felt like it felt like pretty realistic and pretty authentic representation, despite the fact that, again, it's so different from Grossman's own identity. So I really enjoyed the characters in this book. I enjoyed again, I'm not a huge fan of quest fantasy or Arthurian legends, but I still just really enjoyed the experience of reading this. I again loved the prose. I hope his next book doesn't take 10 years to come out, but I'll be here waiting. Okay, so moving on to my favorites list. The first book on this list is Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. How can I even talk about this book? I don't even think I have yet because I'm still just like mulling it over. I don't even know what I can say about this book. I don't know what to say about this book. Just that it took me like 6 months to read, and I loved every second of it. It's just such a rich text, and again, something that I finished it and I immediately wanted to reread it. I did start immediately rereading Shadow of the Torturer because the edition I was reading was from the library, and it was like a hardback omnibus of all 4 books, and it was so huge, and there were literally cigarette burns through the pages, which I brought to the library's attention. Because I'm like, I didn't do this. I wasn't smoking in this book. So I was able to, once I finished that book, immediately go back and reread like the first 50 pages, which I think helped me understand the ending. Literally on Reddit, Book of the New Sun ending explained, and everyone's like, you just gotta reread the entire book and then you gotta read this other book. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that. But not yet. Yeah, this was just such a bizarre reading experience, but such a worthwhile one. Like, I truly don't want to say too much because I just want people to go into this book blind like I did and just like be taken on a wild ride. I kind of compare this to Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Le Guin, not only because they're both, again, kind of science fantasy books that take place in such a far future that it has gone back to being like medieval, but there are these glimpses of technology and sci-fi that you see and you start seeing more and more throughout the book. But it also reminds me a lot of Dune in like the kind of sci-fi weirdness of it all, and how you are just confused at many points in the series. And again, you just have to be totally willing to be taken on a ride by the author and not, be pissed off that you don't understand anything that's going on, and I didn't. So it's also very hard to read at times because Severian is not the most likable or reliable narrator, and he's not meant to be. He's meant to be a very unreliable narrator, and I think also meant to be unlikable, but sometimes that doesn't make it any more fun to be in his head, especially in the later books in the series when he starts being really horrible to women. And again, like, that's purposeful. He is meant to be a misogynist character, and you're not meant to agree with how he thinks about, talks about, and treats women, but again, sometimes not fun to read as a woman. This book is also very Catholic. I had to look up if Gene Wolfe was Catholic after reading it, and I was like, I know he is, because that scene where Severian is like standing on the beach and he all of a sudden starts thinking about like how God made every grain of sand and blade of grass that he's walking on, and he doesn't feel worthy to even walk on the ground. I'm like, this is Catholic. But again, overall, just totally just go into this one blind, like truly just like start reading this. I feel like I enjoyed Shadow of the Torturer, but I started getting really invested in the characters and the plot and like figuring out what the hell was going on here in the second book. I don't remember what it's called. Sword of the Lictor, I think. So keep going. If you start reading Shadow of the Torturer, you're like, well, that was fine, but I don't understand why people make a big deal out of this book. Just keep going. Anyways, another one of the best books that I have read this year is Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. I cannot believe I first read this book this year because it feels like it's been with me my entire life. I think probably because I reread it in September. I first read it in March, then I reread it in September. But yeah, this book just totally came out of nowhere and rocked my world. I found it on a whim and I was just so pleasantly surprised by it. It has so much charm. The kind of political maneuverings are so interesting. The investigation into honor and violence and violently defending your honor and what that does to a person to be so interesting. I love the relationship between Alec and Richard in this book. And again, it's an established relationship and it's one that I actually really love because there is an arc to their relationship. It does not end in the same place that it starts, and they just totally match each other's freak in this book. Like, they are both so weird but love each other so much, and I really loved that. There's also, you know, a couple of my favorite romantic tropes sprinkled into this book, like the, you know, getting kidnapped to hurt the other person, being like, he's never gonna come for me, like you don't understand him, like he doesn't like me that much, and then he comes for him anyways because he does like him that much. That's one of my like favorite, I guess, like micro tropes, and I loved that it was employed in this book. Really interesting world. It's so low fantasy that it might not even be fantasy. Like, it's a very Renaissance world. But again, something just so charming and fun about this book. I really highly recommend. Loved it. Can't wait to reread it again. Okay, then another one that I don't own is Alphabet of Thorn by Patricia A. McKillip. Again, another book that just totally came out of nowhere and rocked my fucking world. I read Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia McKillip and I thought it was good, but it didn't really emotionally impact me at all. Like, I read it and forgot about it, and then someone else recommended Alphabet of Thorn to me and I was like, oh, I'll give it a try. Let's see what else, you know, she has for me. And I just ended up loving this book and being so, again, I said this in my wrap up where I talked about it, the only word I have is gagged. I was gagged reading this book because at the start of the book there's all these like different perspectives and like plot lines happening, and then the way that they are woven together so neatly was so impressive for me. When I figured out where the story was going, I like jumped up and down and screamed, and I was at work when this happened, so they were like, what are you doing? Seeing the way that they came together and being like, I think this is what's happening, but that can't be right, like that, like would she really do that? And then having that be proven right was just so fun. I should also definitely say that Patricia McKillip has an extremely beautiful writing style, a prose style that I just absolutely adore, and I'm typically not one for like overly lyrical, flowery prose, but I just love Patricia McKillip's prose because, like Ursula K. Le Guin, there's a deliberateness to it. Like, it's not just throwing fancy words on a page to be fancy. Like, every word she chooses feels so deliberate and feels like it adds so much to the story. And yeah, I was just totally surprised by how much I like this one. Beautiful cover as well, done from one of my favorite fantasy illustrators, Kinoku Y. Craft, who I actually recently rediscovered. I remember seeing a lot of her work as a child and loving it, and then like seeing a random picture of it somewhere being like, wait, I recognize that artist, like who is that, let me figure it out, and finally figuring her name out, and then again seeing it on Patricia McKillip's covers, which was just a fun little coincidence. Next book is another one I don't have but want to acquire soon. It is Burning Bright by Melissa Scott. I got really into Melissa Scott this year. I read a couple of her books and have really enjoyed all of them. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, even when the plot doesn't entirely come together for me, which I think she's kind of weak with plot, especially ending of books, I don't care because I just love the characters and their journey so much anyways. My cat's really loudly eating a tree anyways, ignore that. But even when the plot doesn't entirely come together, I just love the characters and their journeys so much, and the world building that she has created so much. And nowhere was that, I think, more true than with Burning Bright. I felt like that one probably had the best and the most satisfying plot, but also just a really, really fun cast of characters and a really, really fun premise. The premise of Burning Bright is that like they do like VR D&D space stuff. It's like a space opera where they do VR LARPing basically, and it's all about how Quinn, who is like this master gamer and they're called gamers with a capital G, which just tickles me so deeply, how Quinn is a gamer and she is like on this planet for shore leave, and she starts running games in her spare time, and she kind of gets drawn into this political intrigue going on the planet with this like alien species. And it was so fun. I loved all the characters. Everyone in this story is bisexual as fuck, and I love that, especially for a book from like the 1990s. And I just had such a great time with this one. And then my next favorite is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. I read this book on the recommendation of another booktuber, Fontaine, probably again back in like March or February, and was just so blown away by it. I loved this book, and I loved its commentary on loneliness and on the material systems like homophobia, like racism, like sexism, that lead to people becoming alienated from each other and from the world, and how it seems so hard to connect with people in a world like this. And I just was like bawling my eyes out by the time I finished this, and it truly is just a book where it feels like your heart is being slowly squeezed the entire time you're reading it. But loved it. Thought that McCullers' prose was, again, really beautiful, and just the way that she explored loneliness and connection was wonderful. And I went and read a bunch more from her and ended up really liking all of her stuff. So okay, I also want to talk about The Winged Histories by Sofia Samatar. I read A Stranger in Alondria by Sofia Samatar, and it's one of those weird experiences where you like the book, but you have a lot of criticisms of it. It felt very The Left Hand of Darkness to me, which is one of my favorite books of all time, but just in the sense that it's about like a character going on a journey with another character who they don't entirely understand them or their culture. But I had criticisms with how passive Jevic as a main character felt, and how it didn't really feel like he substantially had an arc. He just kind of is buffeted around by the plot. And then I read The Winged Histories, and that kind of like just was everything I wanted and didn't get from A Stranger in Alondria, I got from The Winged Histories. It is this wonderful story about these four women in Alondria, and this kind of independence war for freedom that intersects with all of their lives. And I loved the various ways of being a woman. It explored through this where so many different kinds of femininity and womanhood, and also so many different kinds. Sorry, I'm looking at my cat who's like trying to knock over her water fountain. And again, the prose is so beautiful. Just like Sofia Samatar has prose where you gotta sit down and read every single word and lock the hell in, but again, doesn't feel like it's just bullshit. Like once you actually understand what she's saying, it makes so much sense and feels so earned within the story. But then I also loved how this is kind of a fantasy epic war novel where the focus isn't on the war at all. It's on the kind of the lead up to the war and the aftermath of the war, and how it impacts these women's lives, and how women in general have been pushed to the margins of war stories, war narratives, and kind of repositioning them in that story and rethinking what a war story is and does. So really impressive book, really fascinating book. I loved it. Okay, and then another favorite is He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. I read the first book in the series, She Who Became the Sun, probably a year or two ago, and then just was so scared to start this book because I had heard really great things about it, but also things that were like, this book will destroy your life. And so I finally read it, and yeah, it did destroy my life, but I loved it. I loved this book. I feel like I really, really liked She Who Became the Sun, but I adored this book. I loved this book. I felt like it was just such an amazing exploration of ambition and the price of ambition and the price of just the idea that there are so many different ways to be a person, and the idea that there's only one way to be a person, to be a man or to be a woman, will destroy your life, was so interesting. And like, again, the price of ambition and getting what you want. I just loved it. We got to a point like halfway through, I was like, we're just gonna have to be like this, because if I move it, she's gonna try to bite it again. It got to a point where we were like halfway through the book, and I was like, everybody has already gotten everything they wanted. What are we gonna do for the rest of the book? And it perfectly explored, again, the price of getting what you want. I was like, everybody's miserable, and I love it. It's like a car crash you can't look away from, but despite it being so relentlessly horrible and negative at times, there is still a great amount of like humor and love and charm in this book, and it actually has quite a hopeful ending. Like, it didn't feel like just misery tragedy porn. It felt like just a very unflinching look at, again, kind of the price of ambition and the price of betraying everything you know for your goals, and then realizing that they don't make you happy at all, but also the idea of, but again, it doesn't just feel like tragedy porn, it just feels like a really unflinching look at what it would be like to be living in that time period and be, you know, queer or disabled or anything like that, but also still has a lot of humor and charm and ends on a very hopeful note. So I just really loved this book. I can't believe that Shelley Parker Chan hasn't written anything else besides this, because I really, really just want more from them. I felt like it was such a wonderful exploration of gender and identity and love and just everything. Like, I absolutely loved this book. Okay, then also one of my favorite books of the year was Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is a monster of a book, and it is unlike any other fantasy sci-fi novel I've ever read. It is not really a novel at all, but rather a collection or an anthropological study of this fictional people who have or will live in a valley in California millennia into the future, after the world has been destroyed by climate change and greedy corporations and other things like that. And so it is framed in so many different ways. It's an anthropological study, and there are, you know, anthropologists writing about the Kesh and their practices, but also there are lots of stories from the Kesh, and looks into their lives and their practices, but also poems from them, plays from them, chapters of novels from them, recipes. There's a QR code in the back of this book to listen to the album of their music written in their fictional language. So just, I think I liked the story, and I loved a lot of the stories within it. Those are the pink ones. But I think what really impressed me about the story was the scope and the depth. Like, it's such a huge book, and it's such a, again, world building exercise where Ursula K. Le Guin sat down and came up with something for every single aspect of this fictional society, but also it doesn't feel like a caricature, and it doesn't feel like a shallow exploration of all those things. It is so deep, and it does feel so real, and so much like real lived experiences of this fictional people, and I loved that. I feel, again, like this is a book I'm going to be thinking about for a really long time, and a book I'm going to be rereading for a long time, and just a book that I'm so glad I finally read. It's so Le Guin. It's like a culmination of everything she ever wrote and was talking about, but it also is so unique in her work, and none of her other books are written like this and in this style, and that makes it such a special reading experience, I think, to me. And I wouldn't recommend it as your first Le Guin, but I would definitely recommend this if you've read The Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, The Telling, you know, any of her other Hainish Cycle books, and you kind of want to see, you know, the culmination of all of those themes that she was talking about in those books, and you don't mind having, again, a slower and less traditional experience reading a novel. Okay, and the last book I have on my favorites of 2025 list is Rakesfall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. This was the winner of the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, and I read it before the winner was announced when I was reading all the nominees, and this was my favorite book and the one that I wanted to win, and it did win. And I just am still thinking about this book even months after I read it. I want to reread it probably before the end of the year, but definitely in January if I don't, because it's just such a like puzzle of an experience, and you are so lost and so confused but so interested for like 95% of this book. And even when I finished it, I still was like, I don't have any clue what the hell is going on. So I feel like a reread would really help crystallize some of those elements. But make no mistake, even though I was confused the entire time, I still loved reading this book and thought it was so interesting and so unique, and was doing something so interesting with all the concepts it was exploring. And this is what I want from science fiction and fantasy in, you know, our present day. I feel like so much of the time I pick up new science fiction and fantasy, and I just feel like I've seen it done a million times before. I feel like it's science fiction and fantasy that has no imagination and no real vision for what the future could be like and what storytelling can be like. And that's why when I find stuff like Vajra Chandrasekhara and Rakesfall and The Saint of Bright Doors, which I also loved, it's kind of also tied with Rakesfall for my favorite of the year, I am so just happy and impressed, and I'm like, this is what I want from sci-fi. I want experimental, weird books that sometimes don't always hit, and this has a very low average rating on Goodreads. It has like a 3.3, but I'm like, I loved it. I want experimental stuff like this that is a little bit messy and maybe isn't as satisfying as you want it to be, but that is just so wild and out there and so willing to take risks and experiment and be, again, I think this is how I described Exordia by Seth Dickinson, but be such smart sci-fi, but also such weird sci-fi. That's what I love. I really love the combination of smart and weird, and I feel like this book does that really well as well. So yeah, I finally bought a copy of this, and I can't wait to reread it, and I can't wait for Vajra Chandrasekhara to release more books, because I've loved the two that I've read. The Saint of Bright Doors is also really good, and that book has does really interesting things with framing narrative and with perspective. I don't want to spoil too much, because when I read like the last 50 pages of that book, I like genuinely screamed, because I was like, I can't believe we're doing this. So I don't want to ruin that experience for anyone else, but just know that The Saint of Bright Doors also I really love, and that's kind of tied for first on this list because I loved the ending of that book. But I feel like overall I enjoyed this book more and thought it was, again, more impressive and more experimental. But The Saint of Bright Doors, again, those last 50 pages, gagged, the only word for it. Okay, so that has been my best books of the year, both my honorable mentions and my actual top 10 favorites list. And even now, I want to change some of this stuff. I can't believe I didn't put the Vorkosigan Saga anywhere, and also I'm currently reading some books that I think might end up being favorites by the end of the year, but we're gonna go with that, and then I can expound upon my choices in comments if I need to. But yeah, I feel like I had a great year. It was so hard to choose even like 15 books for this list, just because I read so many great books this year and read so many books that I respected even if I didn't personally love them, so it's really hard to say what my best books of the years were. But I think I have landed on a pretty solid list. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if they were also your favorite books you've read this year. Let me know what your top 10 books this year. Do you have any honorable mentions? Because I think that that's something that often gets overlooked, like, you know, the books that didn't quite make it to the top of your list but that you still want to recognize anyways. So let me know, and thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!